Good evening, everyone. The time is 5 p.m. and the Belton Independent School District Board of Trustees are now convening a workshop on Monday, May 13, 2024. A quorum of board members is present. This meeting has been duly called and the notice of the meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code Chapter 551. The first item on the agenda is public comments. None. All right. Moving on to item 3, board workshop. Dr. Golan?
Yes, so Todd Schiller, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, is going to join me. We're here this evening to just engage in a discussion around Goal 3, specifically around our KPM and some additional work we are doing around our goal for attracting, retaining, and supporting a world-class team of employees. So Todd's going to get us started.
So our key progress measure is, as we were doing Goal 3 this year, was 100% of campuses and departments will design and implement an onboarding plan for new staff by June 2024. And so before we dive into the kind of our process and kind of what we did, I have to go to this next, oh, there it is. I want us to think about these 3 questions. So just think about if you're entering a position for the first time, or maybe you've hired somebody into the position and they're taking it on the first time, or maybe it was your experience joining the board. So what made that first year journey on the team successful? That's question number 1. Second question, what were your challenges in transitioning that first year? So as you're leaving one position, entering another position, or moving from one thing to another, like what were your challenges going through that first year? And then the last one is, what do you wish your supervisor, team, or district would have done differently to improve your experience? So what could have you gotten from your supervisor or leader to improve your experience in that first year journey? So if you wouldn't mind just kind of talking with your neighbor and just kind of talking through those 3 questions, and then we'll do some shout-outs.
We did this a long time ago.
I mean, I think having
Those types of where feeling like you've got a place to
feel like you matter.
Just not knowing.
having the ability to ask those questions. I think
Like a different culture, different processes and systems.
Yeah.
Reminds me of mine. I mean, I didn't go yet when I was a teacher. And so for me, it was, there was no curriculum at that point in time. There was a list of things, right?
You need to come here on
What do I do with feedback when who do I go through to get that question? Do I go right to the person? Do I go through, I would think that, hopefully.
Unfortunately, that might have been the 100th question, but,
So I just remember being so I did have a really good mentor, and then I had a really good mentor.
I think that's something that,
And they were able to
the board has come up with something.
No, she was an 8th grade teacher, and I was a 6th grade teacher.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
these allow us
And then there were many other
not doing it.
because I like how my class was very last. So anyway, her one little suggestion totally was a game changer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you wish they would have done differently to improve?
I wish there'd have been somebody that,
Or it may not even be something or it may not even be something shared, a lot of discussions on early on.
You know, I never was confident.
Right, I just wish they would have soon.
When you know that you learn quickly, you'll know it.
And I hear that from some of our teachers.
You gotta learn.
You'll say that was the stigma.
We had a similar conversation around that first question before did our last leadership team. And a lot of us teach them how to do things. To that leadership experience. And the more experience you get, the much more difficult it is, especially when you're young, first leadership.
So then you go
It's kind of like making sure you feel comfortable to ask those questions, not feel like you should. You don't have to worry about that. So that's something all these things. I would like to encourage people to take on that analysis, don't be afraid of those questions. Don't be afraid.
Or you don't make fun of me for trying to We did. I know.
Everybody has a different style. There's certain ways to approach them. I mean, one is, and everyone needs to ask open-ended questions. You agree that this would be a fair process?
Do they put you, y'all like that, right? Do y'all have like a like when you come on the board, do they say, hey, here's somebody just needs to pay for anything or out there?
No, it makes a difference.
So you never had to sit and take 2 or 3 days in the same classroom, never being anywhere else. You never were forced to do
You know.
Okay, that's what they could have done with the board president and.
Oh, wow. This is about to be an excitement I think I know what I'm about to hear.
Well, they had it in Dallas, but they said don't go to that because you're already doing a lot of stuff.
Okay, you're good, let's go back. We're just curious if it's done to you. So we want to.
No, they were going to, but yeah.
No, absolutely.
All right, let's come back together. So let's take question one. What was your conversation about regarding question number one?
I think the ability to, I just finished my first year as trustee, and with this all-star team of people who know what they're doing for so long and so intelligent, I think the ability to be able to ask questions has been really important, whether it's the administrative staff or other trustees, is really valuable.
Awesome. What else?
Well, since Janet and I have we talked about our first year, and I think we both kind of landed on the same thing as the people that you work with, the team that you immediately are put on, or the leadership that you're under, that makes a huge difference in that first year. I remember, and I can't remember her name, but when I had just started teaching in Mansfield, there was a teacher who just, and I don't know if she was necessarily assigned to me as her mentor, because I mean this was so long ago, but she just made sure I knew, hey, be aware of this, or she would think ahead, because she would probably think, oh, she probably doesn't know about this. So just making sure I was just always aware and in the know, and how to just use technology or whatever it is that, so just, it's that team, the people that you work with.
That team you work around is greatly important in doing this. Anybody else?
You go ahead.
So we focus our considerations regarding our years as board members. You know, what our first year was like, what our challenges were as far as transitioning that year, and then what we thought should have been done differently. Our first year journey, just the expectations, we felt like knowing what the expectations probably would have helped us be a little bit more successful. Team building, getting to know each of the team members, making sure that all of our thoughts were aligned as far as what's best for the district as a whole. As far as challenges were concerned, what were some of our challenges?
Timing,
Time,
amount of
yes.
time, because we were originally told you only had one meeting a month, and that's what we were going to be doing.
One meeting a month, maybe.
Well, there's that.
You know, one meeting a month, sign me up, I could have done. And then as far as doing something different, that's already been done, we think.
Yeah.
And that was going to SLI as a new board member and sitting with the board president and the superintendent and listening to all that new board member information, and so that you can then ask questions that you don't know anything about to see if we are doing the same thing this person just talked about. So glad that we're not doing that.
Not doing that anymore.
We're not doing that anymore? Okay.
Yeah.
So,
I will take this opportunity to say thank you, because in my first year at SLI, Suzanne was right there sitting next to me, and it made all the difference in the world, right? To have somebody to help put the context together, right? Like, why are we even talking about this, right? And oh, by the way, like, and this is how we do it in Belton ISD, right? And this is how it applies. So, I mean, that made a huge difference to have Suzanne sitting next to me in that meeting.
People need to feel like they matter. You want to know what the expectations are, and Chris and I were talking about feedback. You don't know if you're doing things right unless you get feedback, which is, the mentors that you guys were talking about. So we're all kind of along the same lines.
Yeah. So feedback's important.
Feedback is very important. Yeah.
To doing things right.
Right, and then talking about Suzanne, about you get on the board. I mean, this is a whole new lingo. I mean, unless you're in education, this is a whole new lingo, and it's very hard to get a handle on the big picture, right? Much less the details. So people have to know. I mean, just like I know Rucker and I talked about, man, what do I need to do here? What's expected of me? And people need to realize that they do matter. Because if they don't matter, then they're not going to want to run the position.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to speak to the challenges or what you wish would have happened?
An acronym cheat sheet might have helped.
Okay. So when you think about onboarding, and really, definition is, really about integrating an individual into the organization as well as to the roles and responsibilities that they're going to be doing, right? Just making them feel comfortable that they know what the expectations are and what their roles and responsibilities are going to be within that position. It's not orientation. Orientation's that thing generated by human resources, where you get all the required paperwork, all the benefits, orientation, those types of things. So it is two separate things. So as we started our conversations with onboarding, and the reason why we were having that as a key progress measure, we really looked to like our staff survey data. And there's some questions in our staff survey data centered around an understanding of an individual's role, the district vision and resources. Do they know those enough to be able to do their job and know what our expectations are? And just wanting us to be able to improve in those specific areas in terms of the staff survey. And so we've had scores around, around 70s to 80% on those, but wanted to be able to improve those things. Those should be easy things we should be able to get to and help people understand in that first year to make them more successful. And so the second part of that is listening session feedback. So we've had listening sessions across all the campus, and one of the common themes across that is people aren't necessarily prepared when they first start. The training comes later. They don't know necessarily how to use Skyward to enter grades. I mean, it's things like that. Schoology, software trainings, as well as just where to get information from, right? And so making sure that people have access to the resources to be able to do their job and have the proper trainings along the way, that also is part of that onboarding as well. And the net result of that is going to influence people that we attract, how we retain them, and then how we support them along the way.
Yeah, and if I could just add on the listening sessions, it was interesting. It's not just first-year teachers coming in. It was very experienced teachers that maybe taught in a different district or staff members in a different district, because districts are different in how they do things. It also was staff that had been with Belton ISD, but perhaps switched to, maybe they were in a math classroom and switched to being a teacher who provided special education services. And even though having been in the district needed some more job-alike support, needing some more additional support. I think one of the teachers said, don't assume because I'm experienced that I would know everything when I have changed content or changed specialty area. And so, again, it was for new staff. It wasn't just teaching staff. I recently did listening sessions for principals. They had their own listening session, as well as assistant principals had their own listening session. And that onboarding piece came up again, particularly for assistant principals, and just the need to continue to focus on that onboarding. And they gave us good feedback on where we hit the mark and where they felt like they needed some more support. So it's all staff, not just teaching staff.
How long does onboarding take?
question.
So when we've asked individuals, we'll get to this on the next slide, but when we asked individuals to create their onboarding plans, we focused on the first year, but we also had it broken down in the 30, 60, 90-day sessions, and just constant feedback. You mentioned feedback earlier, just constant feedback along the way, and conversations, so the employee has a chance to share what their concerns are, or what they're grasping or not grasping, or what their challenges are, and the things that are going well too. And just that constant feedback throughout that year.
I mean, that third bullet is really important for lots of reasons, right?
Absolutely.
And it is from a cost perspective, right, it's so much cheaper to retain somebody than it is to go out and find somebody new, right? So just from a dollars and cents standpoint, super important. But it's also really important from like a reputational standpoint, right? And from a cultural standpoint and all that kind of stuff, right? And it is, like you said, way more, it is almost equally about retaining the staff that you have and providing them opportunities to help grow the new folks coming in, right? Emmanuel and I were talking about this. This is a profession that's an art, right? There's a lot of science behind it, right? And how you learn and things like that. But this is a profession that's an art. And so being able to help somebody and grow somebody else to shine as brightly as they can, right? Like retains folks that have been around for a while. So this is like a huge bullet all the way around. It's not just about the new people.
Yeah. And really kind of what we're wanting to get at with this is that retention part of it, right? I mean, when you look at our total staff across the district, or really just the teachers, our teacher turnover rate, our retention rate's been about 80%, which is better than most of the peers and the state average as well. When you take out just the 0 year and first year people and look at that, it drops to about 73%. So we're retaining about 73% of the first year teachers into the second year. So we got some work to do on that. And I think this onboarding plan specifically focused on that first year will help influence that.
And to speak to that as well, if you think about just on this board, how we have changed our practices and we've changed the way we do things and we've changed our culture over time and just in the time that I've been here. So the advice that I would have given to Erin when she came on the board was different than the advice I gave to Manuel, and for sure different than the advice I gave to Rucker. It was different boards. It was a different way of doing things, and they grew and changed with us. And each person that comes on has to keep learning, and we have to keep learning while we're on here. But yeah, that is so true, Chris. It's just that learning and growing is so important. It's not just a one-time deal.
So as we went through this process, and it started last summer, we went through this process, and actually Melinda and I were at a conference and kind of picked up on some things.
Yeah, what really stood out to me, so Todd and I went to a conference and we looked around and realized very quickly, it was in downtown Austin, we were the only educators in the entire conference. And so at first we thought, are we in the right place? And what was affirming, I guess, is that it didn't matter the profession. It was industry leaders from all industries, and people flew in internationally and nationally, and the topic was the same. Everybody was looking at how can we do a better job of onboarding staff and stop thinking about it as an orientation or that first 1 or 2 meetings, but really consider onboarding as not just a year-long journey, but even beyond. And so some learning sparked this, as well as our listening sessions and our data from our surveys.
Yeah. It really created excitement regarding the opportunity to be able to do this. And so we did bring it back. We spent some summer time with leaders and working through just kind of looking at articles regarding onboarding and what onboarding really is, and just kind of like creating demand to be able to do this. And we did have the buy-in. We asked our leaders after those summer sessions to go back and talk with your new employees, right? What are they experiencing? What were the good things that they saw come of it? Man, what do they wish, kind of back to our 3 questions, like what do they wish would have occurred that didn't? You know, what could they have done better? And to kind of utilize that information to start building a draft onboarding plan.
So that part particularly, we talked about doing empathy interviews, because we were about to design something and we needed to make sure that it actually would impact the individuals we were designing for. And so that empathy interviewing piece was an important part of our process.
And then throughout the fall months, quite often we come back at leadership team meeting and start looking and reviewing of the onboarding plans, right, as a group. and having some tabletop conversations about ways to strengthen that, kind of leaning in with their peers, their colleagues, and getting information to kind of my plan includes this, it doesn't include that, and kind of building on each other's plans. And then we asked for draft plans to be submitted in December, but we were specifically after basically 4 questions. The first one, does the onboarding journey describe what we believe in as an organization, right? Does it go into what our vision is, our values and beliefs, just really understanding that, because to me that's the first step in the onboarding experience, right? To make sure that they understand what the district's about. And then it goes to the role clarity, like is the role clearly communicated to the individual, and making sure that onboarding experience has opportunities for that role to be clearly communicated. And then can the employee, are you easy to be able to assess strengths and maybe areas for improvement within that onboarding plan too, through those follow-up sessions that we talked about, the 30, 60, 90 days, and regular sessions to visit with the employees, to talk about their experience that they're receiving. Are they getting what they need to be? And then the last one is, do they have partners identified to go to? Like, is there contact people? Like, this is who you call for this type of question, or is there a mentor assigned to them? And just somebody who can lead, help them lead along with them and learn, help them in the learning process of that onboarding experience. So those draft plans were submitted in December, and then we spent some time just kind of strengthening those plans. Supervisors reviewed them, and then provide guidance and feedback to them based on those 4 questions as well, just to kind of make sure those are in a good spot. And then the final plans have been submitted as well. What questions do you have regarding onboarding?
So, go ahead, Chris.
I mean, I would love to understand more about the 70% or 73% retention in first year, right? And for the 27%, right? What do those reasons look like? That's probably a separate conversation from here, but I mean, that's one thing I wrote down.
Yeah, understand.
Absolutely, and we do, HR and Todd's team, they have been conducting stay interviews to get a sense of what's anchoring you, what makes you want to be a part of our team and stay, as well as exit interviews to try to better understand that. So absolutely can follow up with some of the things that we're hearing. I will tell you, so while we will have absolutely hit this key progress measure, we're going to come back to you with a future key progress measure, because we really just scratched the surface on this particular one. The last couple of listening sessions that we have done at campuses, there's still onboarding work to be done. Todd and I will look at each other and go, okay, we've spent a year focusing. It's clear we're just getting started, because still one of the trends I'm hearing in listening sessions is that we still need to do more, particularly for new employees coming into our system. Still hearing that we haven't quite hit it right yet on the number of software applications that people have to navigate and understand, and knowing when's the right time to provide that training, to give it all at the beginning of the year if I'm not going to have to access a system for 6 more weeks. So the timing of our orientation to that, we're continuing to hear that. And so not hearing as much, like we started to do some improvement of our mentoring program. So I think we've taken strides there, but clearly it is still a common thread in our listening sessions that we need to continue to do work on onboarding. So plan on bringing you in a new KPM, most likely in June, that's going to be around the implementation of onboarding and how we're assessing the perception of our new staff at intervals throughout the year to actually measure the implementation of our onboarding process. So more to come on that.
So Tom, we're having difficulty keeping 1 out of 4, right? We're losing 1 out of 4, right? How long has that been the number?
It fluctuates from year to year. It hovers around
that amount?
you take out the COVID years. The COVID years was obviously a little bit better there.
What's a realistic goal? Across the industry.
I would like that.
Obviously trying to keep as many as you
I
can.
think one of the challenges is most people change careers. I mean, I think the average length of time in career is 3 to 5 years. So you do see a lot of that, especially with younger individuals that are starting careers. I would like to see that number closer to, the high 80s, 85 to 90% is where I would like to try to get.
Yeah. What do you see across districts that are about our size?
I don't have data from TASB that we look at and stuff doesn't break it down from 0 to 1 years, but we can ask around and get that information. I would imagine it's probably pretty similar.
Pretty similar.
Yes.
Because I think that's you said the 0 to 1 year first year. We're not talking about first year teachers that came here from
No.
Temple has
Brand
4
new
years.
teachers into the.
And that first year for teachers, I mean, just growing up around it, there's so many variables that happen then. One is they just try to get a job.
Yeah.
And they flood, but maybe they have a tie to Belton. Their parents live here. They need a place to live for a year, or husband's in residency, so they're going to teach here. And that's when he said that number, like, man, that seems high. But then as I think about it, knowing about these first year teachers that come out, it's flood the market, and whoever grabs me, I'm going to go there. Or I've known people who have come back to Belton with no intention of staying, but it was comfortable to come back and live at mom and dad's while we're saving for this year because my husband and I are moving, or my wife and I are moving on next. So I'd be interested to see I bet that's probably pretty close around everywhere. First year for the 0 experience years.
I mean, it could be spousal job, move, relocation regarding that, moving outside of the state. That's
Because our experienced teachers that move in,
right.
what's our percentage on them that we keep after first year?
The percentage.
It's going to get in that 80%. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of factors that I think play into that too as a first year teacher. If we think about, the challenge of how do I design lessons for the very first time? How do I navigate classroom management? What are my systems and processes? And, how do I diffuse discipline challenges in a classroom, those kind of things. And so we're coming at this problem not just from this presentation is about onboarding, but like the work that Gabby and her team are doing around improving curriculum documents, for example, and really getting clarity around priority standards and aligning which resources support those standards. And so they're doing a lot of work in that you'll hear in future presentations. Things like that contribute to this. It's not just the onboarding and checking in and making sure, but it's also, am I getting feedback from a supervisor? Is someone in my classroom, or is someone checking on me? I know we're focused on teachers right now in any of these positions. Am I getting actionable feedback? So there's a lot of factors that play into that we're looking at. But this one was to ensure that we have an intentional process for thinking through, like if it's a first year teacher and lesson planning, the technology pieces of it, the setting up the classroom and supporting the classroom management piece of it. So this is one piece of it, but I think there are a lot of factors that impact that attrition rate for a 0 to 1 year staff member.
I think you talking about the ability to ask questions, and then what both of you said about being on a good team goes back to the culture.
Mm-hmm.
I would be really interested to know on those stay interviews, which I think is a great idea, how often the culture comes up. I was at middle school the other day talking to one of the parents who's a teacher at our high school, and they said they taught for a long time, they left, went to another district, came right back after 1 year because they said it was a neighboring district, and they said the culture here is so much stronger.
Yeah.
Which I was glad to hear that, but I'd be curious to know if that's a big trend that we hear on the stay interviews.
That's overwhelmingly the majority of every stay interview we have. It talks about the family feel and the culture. Is why people stay.
Todd, how close are we looking at the exit interview data?
We ask everybody to do an exit interview process as they resign.
Does everybody complete it?
Well, no. And we need to do a better job about encouraging those individuals to complete it.
Are
Sure.
they face-to-face interviews, or is it
A document.
a document?
Out of, I'm sorry.
No, so it's both? It's
It's a document. We ask them if we give them an option, if they'd like to come in and visit, we'll do a face-to-face
Okay.
with them. But there's a document that everybody receives as well.
Okay.
a dumb question, but do they still do student teaching the way they used to? Is it a full semester to where, I don't know, I remember the way it was that when you had a student teacher, it was, okay, the first half of the semester, your normal teacher taught, and the student teacher was there helping and doing all, and then the second half of the semester, that teacher sat back and the student teacher did everything. Do they still do that, or is that not a thing anymore?
That's pretty much still the process. I'm looking at Gabby and Gabby's
Yeah.
like, yes.
It depends on the, I'm like, it depends on the program they're in as well. So every university program has a slightly different structure to it. And with alternative certification programs, there's a wider range of the structures now. But yeah.
So is it safe to assume that all these plans have like a core district component to them that then
Yes.
the campuses are building on top of? Okay.
Yes, that is.
Tom, of the exit interviews, how many folks, let's say out of 100, would complete those? What's your percentage?
It's probably half of those that are actually complete.
I mean, you have to take the exit data with a grain of salt because
Correct.
a lot of times you're not going to get the real answers, right?
That
And
was gonna be
so
my question.
the relationship that you have, I know about this, right? I mean, the relationship that you have with the employees or your teachers at this point, like the administration has, like that's the really important piece of it. Like you may know the real reason why they're leaving, but they're not going to put the reason on their
Right.
exit interview. So we have to collect some of that anecdotal stuff.
So we
right?
talk about that a lot
Yeah.
in human resources, about the reason why somebody's actually putting on a resignation form may not be the real reason why
Right.
they're looking. Like, we got to figure out what caused them to start looking
Right.
for the other job. And that's the reason why they're looking. So, good point.
Okay. We are going to go into the next portion of our conversation today, and it's around our leadership pipeline work. And so we wrote an application, and it was accepted, and we were excited to join with a cohort of districts across the state that is coming together to really study leadership pipeline, particularly to the principalship. Now, it can go beyond that, but it really, the challenge across the nation, not just the state, is there's a just as there's been a shortage of teachers, there can be a shortage of principals. And we know the research is really clear. The number one person that has the greatest impact on the outcome of learning for students is the teacher. Second to that, the second position that has the greatest impact on student learning is that of the principal. And so this work has been really around studying leadership pipeline work outside of education and in education, and then also helping us, giving us time and access to other districts and working together to create leadership pipelines within our own systems. And so we have been going through a process with a task force coming together of teachers, assistant principals, principals, and district staff, where we've really been digging into that research and really asking ourselves the questions of what are the most important leadership competencies that we need to lead in Belton ISD. Absolutely at the principalship level, but even broader, just leadership in general, whether we're talking about teacher leadership, whether we're talking about an assistant principal role, my role, Todd's role, but really looking at those important competencies that are most important to achieving and pushing us towards our vision, living out our values and beliefs. And then we've also, through this process, been doing vacancy planning. So they have given us, they being Holdsworth, has given us really robust tools for really being able to start to forecast vacancies, particularly at the principal level and assistant principal level, so that we have a sense of, and we're able to better predict potential vacancies, so that as we're planning our leadership pipeline work, they've even given us data on how many principal-ready assistant principals you should have for every vacancy. So we've done a lot of work in that space as well, and Todd can probably speak more to that.
I'll say with that
particularly.
vacancy planning specifically, just looking at data over the last 5 years, kind of determining what our turnover's been in those principal level positions to be able to project the future.
As well as at the assistant
As
principal
well as the
level.
assistant principals.
So this image just gives you a little picture or glimpse into what we've been spending time, when I say we've been doing research and learning. If you look at the numbers 1, 2, and 3, that part of the pipeline. That is when people are making that transition to that next level. So basically, the levels we've been looking at, leader of self, for example, on a campus would be teacher, leader of self, leader of students. You get to that leader of others, that might be an instructional coach, that might be a team leader, department chair, going to lead leaders. Now you're starting to look at your assistant principal role, and then leading school is your principal role. And so those passages in between, there's a little bit of what we talked about when Todd asked you those initial questions. We all we're going through those passages when we start a new position. I'm going through that passage right now, new position. And one of the things that we have focused on is what are the ways in which we were ready for that position, meaning we understood how our time had to be used differently. We understood how to allocate time, what to prioritize from the new position versus the old position. So we've spent a lot of time talking about the challenge when we move to a new position is in that wonky period where we've started the new role, but yet there's some pieces we needed to still learn. And so this whole leadership pipeline work is really caused us to think about, and I'll give you a quick example. You become an assistant principal. We do a lot of professional learning to support you in being a highly qualified assistant principal. We bring you here once a month. We spend a lot of time on policies, law, discipline, how to be a highly successful assistant principal. That was how we were approaching leadership pipeline work. There's a missing component. Were we including what would make you a ready principal? Because when you are a principal, you're not the primary person doing the discipline. You're not the primary person doing a Title IX investigation. That would be the role of an assistant principal, and you certainly need knowledge of that, but that's really more the role of the assistant principal. And so that's why we have shifted some of our practices, and for our assistant principals, part of their meeting is operationally focused, but now is also very instructional leadership focused. And so this work has really helped us start to make a shift on how we're prioritizing the time that we're spending with individuals and getting them ready for that next role. But the other shift that we have started exploring, if you look at this image, talks about this is best practice in adult learning. Like we learn as adults most from our on-the-job experiences, our on-the-job challenges. That's 70%. And the 20% should be our learning from each other. That's our collaboration time with others. And really 10% should be in the courses. That really was flipped for us. Most of our effort was going into the courses, and another example I'll give you is our Empowering Leadership Academy. I was super proud of that. We implemented that starting last year. That was our primary support for assistant principals to be principal ready. And so what we are realizing through this work is that really should only be about 10%. The majority of our emphasis for our assistant principals that aspire to be principals should really be very intentionally designed on-the-job experiences. And so just even some of this learning has us rethinking and working with principals. So we had them brainstorming recently. So what are the on-the-job experiences that if you aspire to be a principal, you really need to have in the role as an assistant principal? And so really starting to rethink these experiences so that they can be heavily on the job embedded while still having about 10%. There's still some gain in having some courses. We're not saying that's going to go away, but we're going to shift more of our emphasis on being clear about job embedded experiences. And so this, and I'll show you a graphic of this, this is the work of our task force. They completed the last meeting a couple of weeks ago. And so I want to just orient you from the far left moving over. So we didn't start with categories. We started with competencies. And so actually I'm going to start you in the middle of it. So we went through a process of brainstorming. They did some reading, some research on best practice around leadership, looked at industries outside of education as well as education. And those are the competencies that our team identified as being most important for leaders in Belton ISD. And then we took those competencies and grouped them into kind of like categories. And so you see on the left-hand side, so leaders in Belton ISD, we need to be able to build culture, empower people, and pursue excellence. People can remember 3 things really easily, and so that's where those categories become important. And then I'm going to work to the right-hand side of the competencies. So what do those competencies mean? And so a great deal of work, a lot of wordsmithing from our committee went into, so what does it mean to communicate for impact, for example? And so you see there that part of communication is actively listening. That was super important to our committee, but actively listening and strategically articulating thoughts and ideas effectively using multiple modes of a communication, just as an example of the descriptor. Just as Journey of a Graduate, we talked about just the adoption of the Journey of a Graduate competencies was really where the hard work began. And so we are at that point. I'm going to show you this, and then I'm going to talk to you about some next steps, and then see what questions you have. And so this, our committee also worked on graphics. How do we graphically display this? So it was super important. We got the colors of our district in there. So I'm going to start with colors first. You see red, black, gray, and then you see that inner circle, there's purple. So we got our district colors in there. And our logo, wanted it branded for Belton ISD and leaders. And then you see, again, those big categories around build culture, empower people, pursue excellence, and then the competencies associated with those categories. So that's just the graphic image we are going to begin using. And we'll just share with you real quickly some next steps. But before I jump into next steps, I want to stop for a minute and see if you have any comments, thoughts, anything in that this list of competencies or categories jump out at you.
I mean, when I was prepping for this and I got to slide 11, the impact of the 70-20-10, we use this model as well in the corporate space. So when you guys talked about going to the conference and being in a world of other people, right, that weren't educators, right, like this is pretty much universal at this point, and it makes a huge difference, you know, being intentional in these 3 areas. So this is definitely a corporate sort of view at this, for sure. Yeah.
And I'll point out, like, the leaders, we're talking a lot about principles because that's what the whole program's putting us through, but these definitions and the whole work around this is about all leaders within Belton ISD. And it's not just restricted just to principals or assistant principals. It's the same thing for me, same thing for our support services programs.
So in terms of implications of having a definition, so we've spent time with our entire leadership team just getting them thinking through what do y'all think the implications are of having clarity around what we mean around leadership competencies for Belton ISD. And so the things that they talked about are the things that we've been talking about through our work on this so far this year, and that is this informs job descriptions. This potentially informs improved and revised employee evaluations for our leaders in our system. This informs interviewing processes that these definitions are already influencing. We have a couple of principal interviews coming up, our community interviews starting this week. And so these competencies were used to develop the interview questions moving forward in the first round and into the second round. So it impacts the hiring process. And then it also impacts the identification of individuals for having high potential for leadership and being able to help show pathways to leadership positions, and also professional learning, both the 70%, the 20%, and the 10%. And so instead of just brainstorming, well, what could be some job embedded professional learning that we could give our assistant principals? An example sometimes is, well, they need to know how to facilitate a multi-tiered system of intervention or RTI process. Well, actually, they have to be able to do that as an assistant principal. So with these as a focus, what really are the look fors, listen fors, what behaviors would we want to see that would tell us someone has that potential to be in a leadership role, like an assistant principal role. And so one, it helps us self-assess each of us, as well as start to identify potential, so that if there is a 10%, we can start directing people to a 10% or 20% experience. But then also, no, if we want someone assistant principal ready, for example, then what does communicate for impact look like if I'm an assistant principal? What's that look like when I'm needing to call a parent and share something that happened in terms of discipline on a campus? Or what does that look like when I'm communicating with a team of teachers in a professional learning community setting? And so it's going to help us better align what happens in that 70-20-10 to these actual competencies. And so the leadership retreat that is June 6th, is that right? Sorry, I'm putting someone on the, June 4th. See, I never say a date, Melanie. Is 100% being designed aligned to these competencies. And then the professional learning and support with principals going into next year with assistant principals, and then also looking at how do we launch a teacher leadership strand and support. All of that can now be anchored in this definition. And so, again, a lot of work got us to this point, but the work really begins now. And, so I've been sharing with everybody, we've got to think about this in a 3-year look out. To all of that work is going to take us time. So we have to prioritize most important and then just start working the work around, again, everything from job descriptions to interview processes to professional learning. And so we're excited. Todd and I are fired up. Denise has joined. There are 3 of us that have been working together with our task force, and that work, it will continue, but we're excited to be at this point.
Just, I think, a note of something that has stuck out to me. While the language is different, I see from the vantage point of a board member, this can be aligned with all of the work that's anchored around our vision, our goals, values and beliefs, journey. I mean, it's,
Absolutely.
again, the language isn't exactly the same, but it can easily align.
And we were
with all
pretty
that work.
intentional about entering those task force and looking at our vision and our values and beliefs and that language. And you'll see some in the descriptions. There's some language that gets kind of laid over into that. Because we didn't want to lose that.
The other piece we didn't want to lose is we have been providing what's called balanced leadership training to lead, particularly principals, but also district leaders, assistant principals, instructional coaches, and that primarily focuses on, and it's based on research really around the principalship, that highly effective principals focus on what matters most. They manage change well, and they do that while building this purposeful community, which is the culture piece. So we don't feel like this is going in a different direction from some of that foundational training, but we're also looking forward to designing our own and not necessarily using balanced leadership training anymore, but it will become Belton ISD's professional learning. But it is aligned with best practice and research on highly effective principals.
So how are we identifying people within Belton ISD right now that may be teachers? Who is identifying them as potential candidates to start down this path of the Leadership Academy and going down that? How does that work right now?
Well, right now, currently, it's up to the individual campus principal to see something in a teacher and recognize that. And so currently, we do not have a system in place for our teachers. And so, if you're on a campus, like I can speak to Lakewood, for example, I think we have at least 3 teachers that have self-identified and are going through a master's program and are about to finish and are very interested in being assistant principals. So Christy, on her own, has been supporting them with some she's been a part of our task force, so she's been very intentional about that 70%, 20%, 10%, just as an example. I mean, that's happening in other campuses as well. But that's why we're excited about entering in this work, because we don't feel like we have been focused on that and doing a good job around uniformly. How do we ensure it's not just based on whether you have a principal that sees that in you or whether or not you raise your hand on your own, but that we can start to look for these competencies and really encourage, because not everybody wants to be a principal, and that's okay. But we also need really strong instructional coaches, and we need really strong coordinators. We need staff that want to go into the operational side of the house. We want staff that wants to go into the curriculum side. And so also I think the potential of this is helping show leadership pathways for teachers, and it's not only to the principalship.
So that is where you think we are headed in that direction, to where if
Absolutely.
I'm a teacher at the junior high, maybe I don't want to be an AP, or maybe I'm with a principal who doesn't see that in me, but I see that as my future. Instead of me starting to apply in other districts, there'll be a pathway that I can find that says, okay, if I want to do this, here's some other avenues I could go to, people I can talk to, and
Yes.
figure out what I need to do to start taking next steps.
Yes.
And I'll add, eventually, there'll be an assessment instrument, kind of what we call it the employee profile, which is linked to all of this and those look-fors that we've been talking about. And you'll be able to assess individuals from the teacher level about, hey, maybe they need to grow in this area, maybe I can provide them an opportunity by assigning them this project or leading this task force or program. We're doing that currently with APs. We just did a pilot with APs and kind of getting that information back to kind of assess their needs for principalship. So.
Melinda, did I hear you correctly in saying that the 70 now used to be the 10?
I think traditionally in a lot of districts, the focus was on the 10%. It was just like we did with Empowering Leadership. I had 5 or 6 sessions. They were for APs who applied and were interested in being a part of that. I'm proud of what we designed. We went to some amazing experiences outside of the district, in the district. We did a lot of learning, but it was purely in the 10%. There wasn't a focus on, yeah, but what's the job embedded experience that we should be intentionally designing? And that might look a little different for Chris based on his strengths, and it might look a little different from you based on yours. And so better being able to differentiate, because for one AP, for example, it might be that I'm a rock star at Communicate for Impact, but managing change I struggle with. You know, so really being able to better differentiate that support anchored in what we say is super important for Belton ISD.
I mean, that 70% is about how do you take that classroom learning, and how do you take, that 10%, and how do you take that mentoring piece of it in that 20%, and how do you actually bring that to life? Like, how do you practice it, right? How do you hone that skill in a real way that's outside the classroom, something that you can actually use and exercise to be ready, right, for that, whatever that next thing is.
And we did a little bit of that in the Empowering Leadership Academy, and I'll use Megan as an example, assistant principal at New Tech. And so we took that group to Google, and we took them to Morgan's Wonderland. We wanted to give some examples of vision-driven leadership, how you actually see it manifest itself, the vision of an organization in everything from the furniture they select to how they design their office space to, like Morgan's Wonderland is, if you're not familiar with it, it's an amazing park outside of San Antonio. The vision is about each and every student, each and every child should have access to a theme park, no matter their abilities, challenges. And so from that, Megan got they all were asked to do an activity some kind of project back on her campus. And so she took it and ran with it. And for her, it was something around design thinking. She got really intrigued by the Scrum model that's used outside of education. She has a team of teachers super excited. They're studying it. They're actually going, I believe it's to Temple College, to get that Scrum certification, and they're actually using that to apply to their design process for their project-based learning. And so to me, that was a great example of, we spent some time in class on vision, values, and how that should really drive behaviors. We then went and collaborated in an experience, and then she took that and applied that in her actual position as an assistant principal. So we've been doing a little bit of that, but it was not as strategic as we think it now can be, anchored in that leadership definition. We're super excited about it. And we appreciate y'all's time. I think that's the, do I have any other slides?
That's it.
I think that's it. Oh, questions? Okay, no? All right. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd.
Well, that concludes our board workshop this evening. There being no further business, we are adjourned at 5:55 PM.